To welcome everybody to today's session. And I want to start by extending a special thank you to Andrea McHale from my alma mater, the University of Michigan, the Ross School of Business. Correct me on your title. You are the Director of Full-Time MBA and Global MBA Admissions. Is that correct?
Yep, that's correct, Brian.
I want to thank you, like I said, for being here. I'm Brian Phoebe. I'm the founder of GuruFi.com. We're an admissions consulting service. We focus specifically on helping clients build compelling personal statements and CVs. Today, we're going to be talking about something that I think is really timely and important, and probably the first time in this MBA spotlight for the first year, at least, that this has been a big issue, and that's the use of AI, and specifically for most people, that's Chat GPT and MBA admissions. To offer a quick kind of peek behind the curtain, I want to give a special note to Andrea because you're brave. You might not know this, but there were several schools that had sort of committed. I'm not going to name any names, but they withdrew because I think they didn't really feel super comfortable talking about this particular issue. There's a lot of schools that maybe don't have their policies completely ironed out, or they don't have the public facing versions of those policies completely ironed out. This isn't 60 Minutes, so I'm not going to try to give you the Mike Wallace treatment or anything like that. But I do appreciate the fact that you're here because I do think that this is one of the most consistently encountered questions that I face when I'm working with clients. Sometimes because they ask me, and sometimes as a matter of about a month ago, I started just when people would send me essays to give comments on, the first thing I do now is just run it through an AI detector because I know so many people use it, and that's a conversation that you have to have. The last kind of big point that I'll say, and it's something that we were talking about backstage, is one thing I don't really want to do is to create like a roadmap for dishonest people to do shenanigans. So this isn't really about like getting Michigan's nitty gritty of exactly how they might detect AI or anything like that. But I also think it's important that since AI is so ubiquitous and is becoming a tool that everyone is using, it's important to be clear about what's allowed, um, and what's right or wrong, and also maybe what's more effective in terms of actually writing. And I understand you can only speak for the University of Michigan because every school has different policies and different approaches.
I'm just
And
going to caution you there. Even that, I can speak to Ross's graduate policy because each college within the university has taken a different approach to this as well.
yeah, and that's absolutely true. And one of the interesting things, again, in backstage, I was telling you, I used to be a university professor, and I left Harvard right as this was becoming an issue that people were sort of aware of. And so these are policies that are being built kind of on the go. And so it's really fascinating to see how they evolve. And one of the things that I've been doing over the last few weeks is I will check on different MBA programs' websites. And just to give a little preview, I will ask some interesting kind of questions about how Ross approaches that. But schools are changing the notices about the use of AI on the websites. Some still don't have notices. Most now will have some type of indication. Um, and oh, one last thing before we jump in, if anyone in the audience has questions along the way, please use the Q&A, and I'll be sort of monitoring it from time to time. And so if any of you have questions for Andrea or myself, please throw that in there, and we'll do our best to address it. So one of the ways that I wanted to start this discussion is that I think that there's kind of two components of it. There's like the ethical component, which we can get to in a bit, which is like, is what's the right thing to do? But then there's also kind of like the what's the most effective and the best way. And um, will you say a bit about what you look for at Ross from the personal statement? I know that Michigan divides it up into these multiple questions.
Mhm.
Um, will you say what you're looking for, and maybe why ChatGPT wouldn't necessarily be the best way to just produce that, setting aside even the ethical questions of how that might function?
Yeah, I think addressing the first part of what we're looking for, we spent a lot of time this past summer tailoring our questions to really get to know the applicant in multiple different. What's your motivations? Who are you? Kind of what makes you tick? What are you passionate and motivated about? and then what your goals are, because ultimately we're looking for fit when we're reading these essays. We're looking for authenticity. It is really, aside from the resume, which is very impact focused around your experience, before the interview, the only area and criteria of the application, we get to know you as an applicant. So it is very important to us. And then that gets to the flip side of this, using generative AI tools to generate those essays. We lose the authenticity. We lose who you are as an applicant. It creates a lot of vagueness in the response because ChatGPT, even if you have like brand standards associated to your ChatGPT, who you are, it doesn't get to the ethos or the essence of who you are. I'll talk later on with Brian about, it is a tool. It is a useful tool. It's a disruptive tool to our technology. It is here to stay as you go in throughout your business discipline. You'll be using it, predictive analytics and machine learning and AI in many different ways. But it is just that, it's a tool and it's not a source of creation for your voice.
Yeah. So this last summer, when I was starting to get a sense that this was going to be an issue, I toyed around a lot with ChatGPT, and so I did what a lot of people do. Is I just put my resume in, and I said, "Write me a personal statement." And what you will get from it is a personal statement that, on kind of the eighth grade level, is well written. It has like it has a thing that is an introduction. It has your three body paragraphs. It has a conclusion. um, it says things like "in conclusion" or "firstly, secondly, thirdly." um, it structurally looks like an essay, but the soul of the person, and I don't want to get too
Mhm.
over the top, but like there's something missing there, in terms of its ability to connect substantively with what someone cares about. Subtle word choices with how you develop a story, or what you emphasize, or what you decide to focus on within the context. All of those things get lost. And so if you're kind of thinking on the spectrum of like, um, the most unethical use, which is just to say, "Chat GPT, write me a 300-word essay that responds to question one of the Ross um, MBA prompt," that is both the least ethical and probably the worst way to do it, just in terms of like producing the quality essay.
Mhm.
And I haven't given myself the old Pepsi challenge where I see if I can detect one Chat GPT essay from among four or five, but I feel like I could do it. You see enough of them, and oftentimes when I'm dealing with clients, I'll reflect as like, this is kind of smooth in a saccharine way, and so I'll put it through the detector, and sure enough, it'll say like 85% AI detector. Um, so one of the interesting things, and I do want to say, or talk a little bit about Michigan's approach in particular. Um, was there any discussion on your end, and you don't have to tell us if you don't want to, about the idea that these essays are kind of AI proof? And what I simply mean is, like, when I look at your guys' essay prompts versus other schools, I think that if I were to design essays that made it harder to use ChatGPT in a lazy way, yours would come pretty close to exactly what I would do. Um, they sort of ask, questions about fit. There are several smaller essays as opposed to schools that will say, like, "Hey, the standard MBA essay. Tell us what you've done and why you want to why you want to come here." Was there any talk on your guys' end about um, AI proofing, for lack of a better word?
I'd love to say yes, but no. But when we look at what we're asking of our applicants, we really do not want to create barriers. Anything we're asking for someone to complete is important to us. So we take a lot of time to be very intentional with that process. And so maybe just the what we look through in trying to reduce those barriers, find important things that we can glean from our applicants through these essays, it naturally kind of takes shape to be AI proof because we're really trying to get to know that applicant. And the only way to do that is to use your voice to really share those prompts meaningfully so it's reflective of you as an applicant. But no, I mean, again, I'd love to say, oh yes, we were so intentional, and we used all of these like really sophisticated tools to make sure it was AI proof. We absolutely did not.
Okay. I want to take a quick second to just look over here at the Q&A because there's a
Mhm.
lot of kind of very there's a theme that's developing, right? And so I do think we want to kind of take a step back and say a little bit about what you guys view as maybe unacceptable or acceptable. So the first question is here: so we can't use ChatGPT for essays or statement of purpose, even if we are remaining true to our inputs. So let me just give what I think is like the most generous interpretation of that question, which is like, well, I'm applying to business school. If I'm coming to Ross, what you need to know is the things that I've done. And so, if I put that through and I just give you my CV, why is that a problem? Or is it a problem if I simply use ChatGPT based on the things I've done to turn those accomplishments or my CV into an essay for you that answers one of those questions?
I again, so know the policies of each of the programs that you're applying to. Do some research on their website, attend some webinars, get to know what is important in terms of putting your application forward for those programs. I'll share a little bit about Ross grad programs, and this includes the full time MBA program. We do have a policy that if you are using a chat GPT as a tool, right, to check for grammar, to structure your essay, to check for clarity, that we just ask that you cite that in APA format for each of the essays that you use a generative AI tool. And this could be Grammarly for grammar structure. It could be any tool that you're using, just cite the tool. Um, Now, using this truly as a generative AI, it could be a starting point with, hey, here's my resume, here's what my goals are. Where do I even begin with the essay? That's use of a tool. But then from there, you really have to use your own voice, your words through written format of how you are going to present in that essay. They should be your words, and I think I would caution on using ChatGPT right off the bat. It is a format, but you could use it to structure an outline. What are the three key points that you want to hit on within this essay? Because we have very short word counts within our essays. I think that's a great use of a tool for generative AI. Like, I want to hit these 3 points. Where within this essay should I do that? Um, but that's our approach. We want to create accessibility. We are a public institution. And if you're using a admissions consultant, you're using a friend that's looking over your essay, use ChatGPT in the same way. They're not writing your essay, but you're using it as a tool to help you craft that essay.
Yeah, and I think that's, to me at least, and you can tell me where you disagree. I understand that like not everybody can afford a service like ours or
Mhm.
other people who offer services. And so when people ask me about this informally, what I'll say is use chat gpt exactly like you would use a trusted friend who you are talking to and going to get help from for your personal statement or other parts of your admission. So for example, someone comes to us and they say, Brian, like, I used to work at whatever AT&T, and then I took a job at Nike, but what I'm really interested in doing is working and impact investing, right? And so how do I piece those things together? Those things don't really make sense. And so I'll say, okay, let's talk about your first job. What did you do, right? And they'll tell me some stuff about that. I say, okay, what's the positive things you've done? Talk about your time at Nike. Now tell me what you think impact investing is, and they'll do that, right? And so if you can imagine having a conversation with ChatGPT, where you sit down and say, this is the job that I want, what are 3 or 4 things that people who succeed in this space do, and it'll give you that information. And then you say, based on my resume, where might there be places where I've shown these things, right? And they will spit you back that information. And then the key that I like, or like the hint that I like, is to say, okay, from there, what you want to produce is like 3 or 4 things where you can just do some brainstorm. And you
Mhm.
say, okay, chat gpt, based on what I want to do, and you have my cv, give me 3 things or 5 things or whatever the number that you think are interesting about where I'm coming from. And they will then give you those things. And then from there, what I would tell people to do is just take a notebook and a pen and spend 15 minutes just writing about that. Right. And so what you have done is ChatGPT has certainly helped you, right? But it's a tool for helping you get to where you're going to go, as opposed to you saying, Chat GPT, write this thing. Now, I understand it is a little bit more work, a lot more work than saying, Chat GPT, like, make my essay. But I think that the essay that you get from that by having like this conversation with Chat GPT ends up being much better than if Chat GPT just gives you a chunk of
Mhm.
text.
I love that because, uh, in any advising appointment I would do or any admissions chat is that an application should be a reflective process. You're making a very personal choice on the programs that you're selecting that are best fit for you. And then you're looking at what your goals are for those short term objectives. You want to understand what your transferable skill sets are. You want to assess where the gaps are. And that way you're making informed decisions on the curriculum you're choosing to fill in those gaps. I mean, so it's not just writing your essay, but it should be a really reflective process of reinforcing the choices that you're making for your future education and then career path as well. So I love that suggestion. I also would use ChatGPT prompt to just put your essay in and say, "Hey, ChatGPT, what do you think? What question am I answering here?" And if it's giving you the prompt, then you know you're structuring that essay in a way that's informative to your evaluator, your admissions officer that's going to be assessing your application.
I think it's a great tip. I'd never even thought about it that way, but it's incredibly helpful because it sort of serves the same purpose, which is to get a second set of
Mhm.
eyes
Mhm.
on what it is that you're doing. And what I like about all of these things is that one of the challenges a lot of times with clients, and I'm sure that this is the case, when you speak to applicants, is that a lot of times people don't know what's interesting about them. Whatever your life is, that's just what's normal. And so you'll meet incredible people who do things that will just blow your mind. And was like, yeah, of course I did that. And having any type of feedback, whether it's a friend or something like this, that just kind of makes you stop and then like take one step back so that you can start to put together an essay that's interesting and compelling and true to yourself. That's really helpful.
Mhm.
Um, so that's kind of like the maybe what you might think of like the best practices for producing strong essays. There are also a lot of questions about kind of the practical side. A couple of people in here expressing consternation about whether or not Michigan uses AI detection. I don't know if you're willing to take us behind the curtain and talk at all about that, but what do you guys do in terms of making sure that, beyond the fact that these are not great essays necessarily, if Brian applies to Ross and I just, stuck in my resume and say, look, highlight these 3 things and write me a 300-word essay. What are you guys doing on that end to make sure that AI is being used the way that you want?
So we have for many years looked at all essays go through a plagiarism scan. And so if there is a high level of plagiarism, that's not common words or common phrases. So there are large sections of your essay that are word for word from a previous essay submission or something out there that's accessible. So, I mean, that's a huge red flag for us. In terms of the AI software, um, we are not currently using an AI detection because we've tested that, and I would say we are looking towards that currently, but we've tested 3 different tools, and I just don't have a sense yet of the sophistication of detecting if you're using it as a tool or as generative AI where it's writing your essay. There's just not enough differentiation yet between those 2 detections for me to feel comfortable. Because again, when you look at Ross's grad policy, it is you are able to use AI as a tool. And I don't want to take that away because it is part of our policy. So once there is a tool or a software that's able to detect the difference between using it as a tool and using it to generate your essay, I would see potentially Ross taking on that approach too, to using it. So I just because sorry, I'm tripping over my words. Just because we're not currently using it does not mean in the future we wouldn't be using a tool as well.
Yeah, and there's two challenges that I see because I've looked into these different things. One, and this is a technical thing, so who knows? By the time I say it, it might not be true anymore. But a lot of the AI detection is pretty imperfect. So you'll get something that says something like this is 45%
Mhm,
AI. And a lot of times, what will happen is, you give a client some suggestions for things to change. You say, fix this, fix this, fix this, and they come back, and then they're really scared because I put this through an AI detector and it says it's 23% AI generated, and AI was not involved at any point in this process. And so, the I have a set way that I now deal with this to say, okay, what I want you to do is take all the emails that you sent to me, copy paste them, and put them in an AI generator. You know that you wrote those. See what number it gives you, and it comes back, 34% AI or something like that. And so you know that like it's not perfect. And the second is there's now this industry of paraphrasers, or like things that are designed to get around AI detection. They A lot of them work in the sense that you will get a smaller number, but they also just kind of break the essay.
mhm,
And so what I tell people is that, one, if you do things the right way, it shouldn't produce anything that will get flagged. And in fact, most people that I talk to who work with AI detection, or use it, they understand that the false negatives are pretty high, and that at the lower ends, if you're talking about, like really honestly anything less than 50%, if it's indicating, it's likely that it's just, a standard way of writing, that it's
That
detecting a
that's
pattern.
what we're noticing too. I mean, it has to be a substantially high percentage of AI detection for it to be truly an AI generated. But again, we're human and we're trying to be fair and ethical in ourself of how we assess applicants. And so those thresholds for us have not been determined yet. And then the tools like uh, it's it is advancing at a very quick rate. So I do see that in the future being part of an admissions process.
So we have a question here from someone who says they're a non-native English speaker.
Mhm.
Says if anyone uses AI to structure their thought process or validate context for their essay, would that be okay? AI produces to brainstorm. We talked about that some, but do you have any thoughts for people
Mhm.
who use AI when maybe English isn't their first language?
Again, with whatever program you are applying to, know what those policy and the standards are for the program. Again, for Ross grad programs, using it as a tool to do exactly that, to make sure you're grammatically correct, to make sure that you're clear and concise with your responses. You're then using your words and putting that through ChatGPT as a tool to clarify and to create a more comprehensive or thorough essay, but it's your words to begin with. For us, that's appropriate. You just need to cite the fact that you're using it.
Yeah, and when I was kind of preparing for this presentation, and also just kind of in the course of business, I've looked at a lot of different schools' policies. I know Columbia, for example, has a policies decision. I'm supposed to use it
Mhm,
to generate any text. And so your point there, Andrea, is really important because different schools will have different policies. And so if, for example, there is a school that does rely on AI detection, if you do something like um, let's say you apply to school A and they require a 700-word essay, and another one requires a 400-word essay, and you simply shrink it down, and you're then going to go and you use ChatGPT to shrink it, and you're then going to kind of tailor it afterwards. Be aware that a lot of times that reduction process, the algorithm changes the language, the sentence selection, etc., enough that it will then trigger AI detection. And so, I don't want to like cast aspersions on people who decided not to talk about this, because I think that like I will be really interested to see what you and other schools do in like future years. But like right now, one of the real challenges is there's both a technical question, which is like, what are these different things doing? And also an ethical question about like how do you um, how do you rate the different efforts that applicants are putting in? But one of the things, and this is kind of an unusual example maybe, but I remember when I was a kid and graphing calculators became a big thing. I'm old enough that I was among the first to have the TI-82, if that rings a bell.
Okay, my high schooler still uses it because 'cause I'm old school, and she's like, she loves it now too.
Yeah, it was. But one of the things that came from that is people were freaking out at the time, because they're like, you're not. They won't know how to use math if they
Mhm,
use the TI-82. But it sort of changed how people thought about teaching math.
mhm. And
Um,
now assessments too, right? Like, when we took an ACT or an SAT, you could have a non-graphing calculator, and now you have the graphing calculator because it's a tool now to do mathematics or problem solving at a higher level than the expectation was when we were students. So, you time will evolve things.
Yeah, and that's the question or the point that I would have. Do you have a sense of, either through your conversations with the business school itself and how they think about these technologies and the work that they do, or how you think about what it is that you want from an applicant? Do you feel like this is creating a discussion about that, and like how best to identify applicants, or like this is like a tool now that everyone has?
So I think there's multiple facets to this question. Taking, like, you had used the example of taking a 700 word essay and then shrinking that down to a 350 word essay. That's a pet peeve of ours because um, when we're asking a question, we want you to answer the essay question that we're asking. Whether you're using ChatGPT or not, if you're taking an existing essay question from a different program and trying to piece it together to answer our question, we our evaluators notice those things. Those are red flags to us because it doesn't necessarily get to the heart or the meat of the question. It becomes, just like ChatGPT, very vague, and it kind of brushes on answering the question but doesn't necessarily always answer our question. So when you start an essay question, look at the essay question that's being asked of you and structure your response based on that question, not trying to piece together existing things. There may be, as you start structuring it together and you have your outline and you're working through, there may be pieces that are similar, but you're answering that question. Then, when you think of AI usage based on policy, as a student, you're going to have different expectations based on the professor that you're working with at any given time, what that tool policy may be for your classes. And then as you go into business, we have classes that are structured around machine learning and AI. We want it to be a useful tool. I went to a conference and it was like, use ChatGPT as your intern. So I always tell my team, I'm like, use it as your intern. It is not your brain, it is not your thoughts, but if you can use this tool to expedite a process, use it in a meaningful way. Um, I think there's many facets to this. If we're really focusing just on the essay crafting of the application, know the policies of the program, use it as a tool and not as your voice. Essays are hard, and they're meant to be hard because it is reflective. But if you do the work, you will have more meaningful decisions when those admit letters come. You'll know what programs that you fit best with. You'll know that you put in the work, and you're the app oh my goodness, the admissions officer will know you as an applicant.
The other part of too, and this is one of those things that when you're in, the role of applicant, it is very hard to hear, and you don't. People often don't believe it, but I say that admissions is a two-way process. That you like Michigan is looking for the right fit for their class,
Mhm.
but you also have to think about, um, what's the right school for me. And the best way that you can do that is to write an essay that's really reflective of what your values and aspirations are. And so, again, like if you at some point in along the way decided that Ross is just really where you got to go, and you'll sort of morph yourself to try to get there, that can be hard to hear. And I'll often tell clients, like, look at this as a two-way, and that's the one thing that they always resist until after they get in. But I think that there's a lot of truth to that, which is that, uh, the more authenticity and effort that you can put in, the better off you're going to be about finding a place that's the right fit for you. And I'll just make a quick uh, note about what you said about the shrinking essays, or repurposing
Mhm.
essays. It's not precisely on point, but the thing that I absolutely agree with you on is that you every applicant should think of it in reverse, if not like, how can I take this 700 word essay and like shrink it down to 300? Just say I'm going to start all completely over with essay number two, and if there happens to be things in the other essay that you can port over without shoehorning it, then absolutely do
Mhm.
that. And I guess how that ties into the chat GPT thing is that, again, what you're always trying to do is to make sure that like you are in charge of the actual words and ideas that go in, to the essay, and it's not just like shrunken down. Because what you do, the space that you operate in a 300 word essay is different, like strategically, structurally, everything. And then those schools that have like the 150 word mini essays, those are almost like smash and grabs where you got to just like get in there, say the thing you're going to say, and then move on. And so every one of these things are very, very different. All right, we've had some questions about use of grammatical error or grammatical things. Again, this
Mhm.
is school specific. Michigan asks that you cite that. I think a lot of people use Grammarly or similar products kind of on a daily basis. Other schools may or may not ask you to say that.
So,
Just as Go ahead.
again, sorry, just Brian, even if it's Grammarly, cite it, um, because right now we're not using AI detection tools, but in the future, if we ever did and it's cited, then we know you used it as a tool, and that it is not plagiarism or unethical because you're sourcing the tools that you use. So just please know that we're very for using these as opportunities for to create accessibility, but it is on the onus of the applicant to cite that information.
Yeah, and again, there's a bunch of kind of like practical questions here. So someone says they checked their essay and they got 60% AI because they they reduced the word count. I think we talked about that. That is a way that that you can end up getting in trouble with these things. Um, Brainstorming answer, refine it. Like, be very careful about asking ChatGPT to rewrite things because again, that's a way that you can end up getting red flagged. Um, so like all these things are, again, keep saying it, kind of school specific. Does Ross requires a CV, yes, or
Yes.
resume?
Resume, one-page resume. So I would not necessarily a CV, but a one-page like business forward resume.
Okay. Any specific issues with that? I always assume that that's less of an issue because it's not.
I for your resume, you're with anything that you put in the bullets, you really want to quantify the impact that you've had, both
Okay.
from your career experiences, your extracurricular, your volunteerism. Um, so quantifying the impact. ChatGPT again can be used as a tool to make sure that it's structured in a meaningful way, but how you quantify that, the scope of the work that you did, the context that you put in there should be your own words. Um, because if we're asking a question and we have a semi-blind interview, so your alum interviewer is going to see only your resume and it's typically a conversation starter. So if you have something in your resume that you're like, oh, ChatGPT did that, it could be a red flag if they're like, oh, this is tell me about this, and you're not able to speak to it. So anything that you're putting in your resume, whether you're using a tool to create the bullets, it should be your work, the impact that you've had in your organization, and how you quantify that should be, again, correct and ethical in a way.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I always tell people who get CV revision is that in most instances they're not read in the same way that an essay is.
Mhm.
That their primary utility is something that's scanned, oftentimes in the course of a conversation. So write it in a way that's kind of clear, easily scannable, and always include things that you want to talk about. because oftentimes that's what happens, right? So even things, if you if it's one of those CVs that has a bit at the end about things you're interested in, include things that you're excited, stories that you're excited to tell about some additional passion or whatever it is. Um, let's see. Question about has the use of ChatGPT reduced the work and revenues of admissions consultants? Yeah, it has some, but what not to be entirely self-serving, I think that one of the things that I've tried to do is to tell people that like how I do what I do, and that there is a way to replicate some of that via ChatGPT. And again, if you missed the first part of our conversation, a lot of that is almost pretending like ChatGPT is a person or an entity um, that you're having a conversation with. Um,
But if I can, because
yeah,
the human element, though, of having that conversations with an admissions consultant or a peer or a friend or a family member, ChatGPT will never replace the strength that that has on your essay and the impact it has to have like a true human conversation. And the same way with admissions officers, that human element of evaluation will never go away. That is why admissions also exists. The admissions consultants exist. But it this generative AI is a new tool, and it is changing the way that we think about things as well, within this industry.
yeah, and one of the ways that I guess it's sort of similar is it's the difference between a CV and an interview is sort of the difference between talking to a person and using ChatGPT. I like I said in different like blog posts or things I've done for GMAT Club, I will provide prompts and things is like here's some ways that you can kind of replicate what someone like me does. But it is different. I think in a really important ways. It's why you don't just send a text to everybody instead of say answer these 5 questions. You do an interview because a conversation is different.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's great about having a conversation with someone is that you can stop them along the way when they throw in something that seems like a throwaway line. It's like, wait, you climbed Mount Everest? Stop. Like, let's talk about that for 90 seconds. And so there is, when the human element gets introduced, then like I said earlier, there's ways that we don't always know how we're interesting or why we're interesting or the other thing that ChatGPT is not great at right now um, is that when you see certain patterns over and over again. So there's certain things that since I've at this point, like you probably read thousands of these essays. So like, okay, look, here's something that way too many people say. So let's either not say that or find a different way to say it. And so those are additional ways um, uh, that it can be helpful. Um, Let me scroll through, see if we have about 6 minutes left. So let's see if there's any additional questions before we wrap things up. Um, Again, like it is very, very different from school to school. Uh, I, like I said earlier, I went and looked at a couple of dozen schools' websites. Their policies for AI are changing. Some of them are being added. It's relatively new. A year ago, ChatGPT existed, but it didn't. People weren't using it really this robustly. Um, some people are asking about data on. I don't think there's probably you don't have great data, and I don't have great data on the percentage of people that are getting in trouble for ChatGPT plagiarism. Um,
Well, so it's not necessarily ChatGPT plagiarism, but we do put ours through a plagiarism tool, and it is a very, very small percentage of our overall applicants. And then I had this one question around like, well, I ran mine through a tool and it was 90% human written, 10% AI generation. So we are not using it because we don't have those thresholds, but there's common syntax and phrases that is naturally going to pop for an AI detection, even if you've 100% read it. So I would not be concerned with low thresholds